Catholic churches are built to gather people in faith, prayer, and a shared search for God. Yet some sacred buildings have become the center of battles that reach far beyond religion. Once their walls became connected to nationalism, dictatorship, ethnic conflict, disputed wealth, and unresolved historical wounds, they stopped being seen only as places of worship. They became political symbols, and public opinion split around them. These are not simply 7 of the largest, richest, or most unusual Catholic churches in the world. Each one became a battlefield over memory, identity, power, and the meaning of sacred space. Supporters see courage, survival, justice, and national renewal. Critics see exclusion, political control, hidden suffering, or religious imagery used to legitimize authority. Some of these debates have continued for generations, and none can be settled by architecture alone. Can a Catholic church remain sacred when its history is inseparable from the political forces that built, controlled, or exploited it? The first church on this list became a symbol of faith, resistance, and a nation still struggling to heal. Subscribe to the channel as we uncover 7 Catholic churches that completely divided public opinion. Number 7. Metropolitan Cathedral of San Salvador, El Salvador. At the heart of San Salvador stands a cathedral inseparable from the country's struggle over faith, justice, and political power. Beneath its sanctuary rests Saint Oscar Romero, the archbishop whose defense of the poor made him both a beloved pastor and one of Latin America's most controversial Catholic figures. El Salvador was approaching civil war when Romero became archbishop. Rural communities faced military repression, civilians disappeared, and families searched desperately for missing relatives. Through homilies broadcast across the country, Romero exposed abuses, rejected violence from both political extremes, and insisted that no government or army stood above human dignity. For farmers, victims, and human rights advocates, his voice represented the gospel put into action. They believed he was not turning the church into a political party, but fulfilling its responsibility to defend life when public institutions had abandoned the vulnerable. Powerful landowners, military leaders, and some conservative Catholics saw something different. They accused him of encouraging class conflict and allowing liberation theology and left-wing politics to enter the church. On March 24, 1980, Romero was assassinated while celebrating Mass at the chapel of the Hospital of Divine Providence. Days later, an enormous crowd gathered outside the Metropolitan Cathedral for his funeral. Explosions, gunfire, and panic transformed the ceremony into chaos, leaving many people dead or injured. Even national mourning had become trapped inside El Salvador's political conflict. From then on, the cathedral carried 2 opposing meanings. To pilgrims, it became a sanctuary of conscience and the resting place of a saint who defended people without power. To his critics, it represented a church that had crossed from pastoral ministry into political activism. Catholic teaching does not require loyalty to a political faction, but it also rejects silence when human dignity is attacked. Romero's story exposed the tension between those responsibilities. In a polarized society, even defending the innocent could be labeled revolutionary. The Metropolitan Cathedral of San Salvador therefore remains at the center of a difficult question. Did Romero politicize the church by confronting oppression? Or would remaining silent have betrayed the church's mission? Number 6. Basilica of Jasna Góra, Częstochowa, Poland. Long before Poland had secure borders or political stability, Jasna Góra had already become a symbol of national endurance. The fortified monastery houses the revered Black Madonna of Częstochowa, an image of the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus that has drawn generations of pilgrims. When the monastery resisted a Swedish siege in 1655, the event entered Polish memory as proof that faith could protect a nation facing invasion. Historians continue to debate its military significance, but its symbolic power became undeniable. That meaning only deepened as Poland endured foreign partition, Nazi occupation, and communist rule. Jasna Góra offered something political systems could not fully control, a shared Catholic identity that connected the country's history, suffering, and hope. For many believers, Love for Poland and devotion to Our Lady of Częstochowa grew so closely together that separating them seemed almost impossible. Yet the same connection that once helped preserve national identity now divides public opinion. Conservative leaders and nationalist movements have repeatedly appeared at Jasna Góra, presenting Catholic tradition as the foundation of authentic Polish life. Supporters consider this a natural continuation of history. They believe the shrine should defend the moral inheritance that sustained Poland through occupation and communism, especially as secular culture reshapes the country. Critics see a more troubling development. They argue that when politicians speak as though Catholic belief defines who truly belongs to the nation, religious devotion becomes a political boundary. Catholics with different social views, non-religious citizens, and religious minorities can be made to feel less Polish, even when they share the same loyalty to the country. Wider criticism of the close relationship between Poland's church and conservative political power has also caused some Catholics to distance themselves from institutional religion. The Pauline authorities responsible for Jasna Góra recognize that danger. In 2020, they introduced rules prohibiting partisan political speeches and the promotion of hostility, racism, xenophobia, nationalism, and fundamentalism within the shrine. The decision did not reject patriotism. It attempted to protect a sacred place from becoming the property of any political faction, although controversial political messages have continued to surface around some pilgrimages and public gatherings. Jasna Góra therefore carries a difficult double legacy. It remains a sanctuary where Catholic faith helped preserve Polish identity, yet it also exposes the danger of treating one religious tradition as the sole measure of national belonging. The disagreement is not over whether the shrine matters. It is over who has the authority to define what its history means for Poland. Number 5. Mosque-Cathedral of Cordoba, Spain. Inside the Mosque-Cathedral of Cordoba, two sacred histories remain visible at the same time. Red and white arches stretch through the former prayer hall of the Great Mosque, while a Renaissance cathedral rises from the center. The contrast is beautiful, but it also explains why this Catholic church has become one of Spain's most contested religious monuments. The mosque began taking shape in the late 8th century when Cordoba stood at the heart of Muslim-ruled Al-Andalus. After King Ferdinand III captured the city in 1236, the building was consecrated as a Catholic cathedral. Centuries later, a cathedral, nave and transept were constructed inside the older structure, permanently joining Islamic and Christian architecture within one sacred space. Modern controversy centers on three issues: ownership, naming, and prayer. The cathedral chapter registered the property in its name in 2006. Church authorities argue that the building has functioned continuously as Cordoba's Catholic cathedral for nearly 8 centuries, and that the church has preserved it as an active place of worship. Critics respond that a monument of such global importance should not be controlled or interpreted by one institution alone. Its name became part of the conflict as well. When references to the mosque appeared reduced in some official materials, historians and heritage advocates warned that Cordoba's Islamic past was being pushed into the background. The combined title Mosque-Cathedral is now widely used, but the deeper disagreement remains over which identity should receive greater emphasis. Prayer creates the sharpest division. Catholic Mass is celebrated inside, while current rules reserve religious worship for Catholic use. Church officials defend this policy as necessary to protect the integrity of a living cathedral. Some Muslim groups and interfaith advocates argue that limited shared prayer would acknowledge the building's Islamic legacy without erasing its Catholic function. Cordoba continues to divide public opinion because neither side is arguing only about architecture. Catholics defend a sacred space with centuries of continuous worship, while critics defend a layered history they fear could be narrowed by institutional control. The real conflict lies in whether one building can fully protect its present religious identity while giving equal dignity to every civilization that shaped its past. Number 4. Basilica of Our Lady of Peace, Yamoussoukro, Côte d'Ivoire. Before the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace was admired as an architectural wonder, it was already being judged as a moral contradiction. In a country facing debt, limited public services, and deep economic pressure, President Félix Houphouët-Boigny ordered the construction of a church so immense that it would later be recognized as the largest in the world by exterior area. The project began in 1985 in Yamoussoukro, the president's hometown, and the political capital he had personally promoted. Its marble, stained glass, towering dome, and vast ceremonial spaces were designed to give Côte d'Ivoire a Catholic landmark equal in ambition to the great basilicas of Europe. Houphouët-Boigny described it as a personal offering to God and a monument dedicated to peace. For many African Catholics, that explanation carried real weight. They rejected the assumption that monumental sacred art belonged only to wealthy Western nations. To them, the basilica gave African Catholicism visibility, dignity, and a place of international importance. It also became a site of pilgrimage and, during later periods of unrest, a refuge for people seeking safety. Yet the scale of the building kept pulling attention back to the lives outside its walls. Critics asked why imported marble and vast sums of money had moved forward faster than hospitals, schools, and basic services. They saw the basilica less as an act of devotion than as a carefully constructed image of presidential greatness. Its location in Houphouët-Boigny's hometown only strengthened that suspicion. The tension reached the Vatican as well. Pope John Paul II eventually consecrated the basilica in 1990, but the project remained linked to a promise that a hospital would also be built nearby. That hospital took many years to become operational, creating an enduring comparison between a sacred monument completed with remarkable speed and a social institution delayed for far too long. The controversy surrounding Yamoussoukro does not reduce easily to beauty on one side and poverty on the other. The deeper conflict is over priority. Can a nation defend the right to build something spiritually magnificent while many citizens still lack essential care? Supporters believe the basilica gave African Catholics a monument worthy of their faith. Critics believe it revealed how easily religious language can protect political vanity. Number 3. Church of Saints Peter and Paul, Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. In Mostar, the skyline still carries the divisions left by war. Minarets rise above neighborhoods shaped by Bosniak Muslim life, while the bell tower of the Church of Saints Peter and Paul climbs far higher than anything around it. In another city, that difference might be treated as architecture. In Mostar, it became a public statement. The original Franciscan church and monastery were destroyed during the Bosnian War, when fighting between Croat Catholic and Bosniak Muslim forces tore the city apart. After the conflict ended, the church was rebuilt, but the new complex did not simply restore what had been lost. Its bell tower, often called the Peace Tower, reached approximately 107 meters and permanently changed the visual balance of Mostar. For local Croat Catholics, the tower represented survival. Their church had been erased by war, their community had suffered displacement, and reconstruction became a declaration that violence had not destroyed their faith or their right to remain. From that perspective, the height was not an act of domination. It was a response to loss, a visible sign that a wounded community had returned. Across the divided city, however, many Bosniaks read the same structure differently. The tower rose above the minarets, the old bridge, and nearly every surrounding landmark. In a place where religious identity and ethnic territory had become deeply connected, its scale appeared less like reconciliation and more like visual control. Critics argued that a structure named for peace should not overwhelm the symbols of another community still carrying its own wartime trauma. That disagreement reveals how post-war architecture can acquire meanings far beyond the intentions of its builders. A bell tower may call Catholics to prayer, yet it can also be interpreted as a marker of who claims the city. Rebuilding one community's sacred space may restore dignity, but when the new structure dominates the shared skyline, restoration can begin to resemble competition. Mostar's church therefore divides public opinion, not because anyone disputes the community's right to rebuild, but because the city has never fully agreed on what rebuilding should look like. To some, the Peace Tower proves that faith survived destruction. To others, It shows that the struggle for visibility continued long after the weapons fell silent. Number 2. Sacré-Cœur Basilica, Paris, France. Sacré-Cœur rises above Paris as a place of prayer, yet many French people still see it as a judgment cast in white stone. Its domes dominate Montmartre, the hill where one of the most painful political uprisings in French history began. For pilgrims, the basilica honors the mercy of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. For its critics, it stands over the memory of revolutionaries defeated by a conservative state. The project emerged during a national crisis. France had suffered a humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Paris had endured siege, and the country was struggling with political collapse. Catholic supporters proposed a national vow, arguing that France needed spiritual renewal after decades of conflict, revolution, and social division. Parliament later declared the construction a matter of public interest, giving a religious act of penance an unmistakably political dimension. Montmartre made the symbolism far more explosive. In 1871, the hill became closely associated with the beginning of the Paris Commune, a radical government supported by workers, Republicans, and left-wing movements. Its defeat during Bloody Week brought mass executions, arrests, imprisonment, and exile. Because Sacré-Cœur was later built on the same hill, many on the political left came to see it as a monument imposed by the victors over the memory of the defeated. The historical reality is more complicated. The original national vow began taking shape before the Paris Commune erupted, so the basilica cannot accurately be described as a structure conceived solely to celebrate its suppression. Yet construction moved forward within the conservative political atmosphere that followed the uprising. Its language of national penance was easily interpreted as a condemnation of revolutionary France, even when its founders spoke more broadly about war, moral decline, and national suffering. Inside the basilica, the political noise gives way to a very different reality. Perpetual Eucharistic adoration began there in 1885 and has remained central to its spiritual identity. Catholics enter not to celebrate military victory or political repression, but to pray before the Blessed Sacrament and contemplate the love of Christ. For them, reducing Sacré-Cœur to a political monument ignores the living faith practiced within its walls. That spiritual life has never erased the dispute outside. Secular groups, left-wing politicians, and defenders of the Commune continue to argue that the basilica represents an alliance between Catholic power and conservative nationalism. The controversy resurfaced when efforts to grant the building stronger, historic protection faced resistance from those who believed official recognition might soften or sanitize its political meaning. Sacré-Cœur divides public opinion because its two identities cannot be separated easily. It is both a functioning Catholic sanctuary and a structure built within a fiercely contested chapter of French history. One side sees mercy, repentance, and uninterrupted prayer. The other sees a political order, placing its monument above the graves and memories of those it defeated. Number 1. Basilica of the Holy Cross, in the valley of Cuelgamuros, Spain. A stone cross nearly 500 feet high rises above the mountains northwest of Madrid. Beneath it, a basilica has been carved deep into the granite, surrounded by the remains of nearly 34,000 people who died during the Spanish Civil War. From a distance, Cuelgamuros appears solemn and peaceful. Beneath that silence lies one of the most bitter disputes in modern Spain. Francisco Franco ordered the complex after his nationalist forces won the Civil War. His regime presented it as a monument to the dead and later promoted it as a place of national reconciliation. Yet the project was conceived by the victorious dictatorship, built within its political vision, and partly constructed through a penal labor system involving Republican political prisoners. For many Spaniards, reconciliation designed by the winning side could never be completely impartial. The controversy deepened when remains were transferred from cemeteries and mass graves across the country. People from both sides of the conflict were buried inside the basilica, but many Republican victims were moved without the knowledge or consent of their families. Relatives who had already lost loved ones discovered that the dictatorship had also decided where and how they would be remembered. The debate became even more intense after Franco himself was buried near the main altar following his death in 1975. His presence transformed the basilica from a place of mourning into a symbol closely associated with his regime. For decades, supporters of Franco gathered there to honor his legacy, while many victims' families regarded the site as a painful reminder that the dictator occupied the most prominent place inside a church built in the name of reconciliation. Supporters argue that the basilica remains a consecrated Catholic church where Mass is celebrated and prayers are offered for everyone who died in the war, regardless of which side they fought for. They believe removing its religious identity or treating it only as a political monument would reopen old wounds instead of healing them. Critics answer that genuine reconciliation cannot exist without historical truth. They argue that a monument created under a dictatorship, built in part by political prisoners, and associated for decades with Franco's burial, cannot simply be separated from its origins. For them, honoring the dead must also include acknowledging the suffering of families whose relatives were transferred there without permission. In October 2019, the Spanish government removed Franco's remains from the basilica. The decision ended one chapter of the controversy, but not the debate itself. Today, Cuelgamuros continues to divide public opinion because Spain is still wrestling with the same question: can a sacred place built by a dictatorship ever become a true symbol of reconciliation, or will its history always overshadow its prayers? 7 churches, 7 stories, and 7 historical wounds. Together, they reveal that a Catholic church is never defined only by marble, domes, or the prayers offered within its walls. It also carries the intentions of those who built it, the power of the age that shaped it, and the memories of the communities that continue to live around it. Governments may collapse, leaders may disappear, and political movements may fade into history, but the monuments they leave behind can survive for centuries. A church may remain a sincere place of worship for millions of believers while still carrying political wounds that have never been fully healed. Catholic reconciliation does not require history to be erased, softened, or rewritten. It begins when truth is faced honestly, justice is taken seriously, and the suffering of every victim is heard with dignity. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Share your perspective in the comments. How can the Church protect the sacred identity of its churches when political power attempts to claim or reshape them? Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories exploring the faith, history, and controversies that continue to shape Catholic culture around the world.